that we didn't love freedom enough. And even more, we had no awareness of the real situation. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterward. Solzhenitsyn. But we've been stood up.
Never trust the Liberals, you see. Never trust the Liberals.
Yeah. So
they promise a lot. They talk a good game.
They don't deliver.
Yeah, we're going to shadow the Labor Party.
We've been sitting here concerned about that, but we're actually going to go with another issue, and we're bringing in the esteemed Archie McLean, of which I know very little, but Damien's raving about him, so we're going to bring him in here. Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Archie. Nice to meet you, Archie. There's
you put a shirt on, very nice.
Yeah, Archie, as our special guest, why don't you introduce yourself a bit and just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll proceed with the conversation.
Okay, hi everybody. My name's Archie McLean. So I ran last year as a Liberal Democrats candidate against the lockdown. One of the early, the brave, the too far ahead of the curve. But before that, I was building a boat in England during the first lockdown. I was stuck there for 4 months of 2020 there, and then I came home to find my home state and city gone completely insane.
Pretty well, that's it. That's the word. There's
a new father. My lovely, healthy baby Monica was just born, and my job fired me for not wanting to get the jab, and sizable numbers of my family won't come to our house because we're unvaccinated.
And didn't you have something the other day, like where your godfather actually came to the house? He brought some food, but he wasn't prepared to come in and meet your new child because you hadn't been vaccinated, and a week-old baby, or maybe 2 or 3 days old at that stage, hadn't been vaccinated as well. Is that right?
Right. So fear, very strong in some sectors of the family. Got some people with some illnesses. It's understandable. Like if there was like a big flu or a pneumonia going around, people might not want you to visit. But some people have been like locked inside.
Oh, here he is.
Like 2 years. And, they're just not willing to come to anybody's house who's unvaccinated. And that includes tiny babies who've just been born and just wanted to show
Archie,
family. Yes.
I hate to be rude, but David's here. I'm going to stick you in the back studio for now and come back to you. David, how you doing?
How are you? You well?
We just
had a bit of techno trouble there. Sorry about that,
David. We were just so close to start bad mouthing you. It was just terrible, but we held back. We restrained ourselves.
I'm pleased you did.
Now we
can still look at you now.
First off, it seems like congratulations. It looks like you've had a win, and you're going to get these documents.
Well, we'll see. We're just about to put up a ticking clock asking for them to, commit to the release. But on Daniel Andrews' form, I think there's every chance they'll resist and they won't release stuff. So they'll, they're dogged and they keep fighting and they don't want to release the things. So I think if I was to put money on it, I'd say despite an order from the independent umpire from the OVIC, they will resist. Even so, they'll try and appeal that.
So if it goes from that, though, if they lose the appeal, what's the mechanism to force them to do it? Or can they just keep...
They can appeal. They've got to appeal by next Friday week. They've got 14 days. And
14 days.
Yeah, they should. If they want to appeal, they've got to do that to VCAT.
Mm-hmm.
But, if I was to put money on this, I mean, I think they're just shocking and they're so non-transparent on everything that they will resist. They think they're immune and immortal from the law of the land.
Yeah,
they've shown us that on the street as well, haven't they, Michael? They've shown us that exact same form.
Yeah, that's the thing. One thing we were going to bring up, which has just happened before, literally in the hours before you came on, David, is this, which is going crazy now on the internet, is this here. It's a protest march to oppose the anti-vaxxers and the far right and the racists and the fascists the protests. Now, what's really interesting and why people are going crazy about it is it's allowed to have its own Facebook. It's got leaders. They're not been arrested for incitement. I'm guaranteeing you that the Bearcat won't show up. It's already got huge numbers ready to come there to do it. It's right in the middle of the city. I bet you the city won't be locked down. And to me, and to Damien and everyone on the internet talking, it seems to be working towards setting up a hate class in our society. What do you think? Well,
look, I think what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I think you want evenness in this. If you're going to enforce laws, you should be enforcing them dispassionately and evenly, and not with favoritism. So, I'll be honest. I mean, and not everyone in your audience would, actually agree with me, but I've always been very nervous about large gatherings in the middle of a pandemic. And, before the Black Lives Matter, outing, I read to the press from some journal articles from the 1819 pandemic. And
that's the Spanish flu?
The Spanish flu.
Yep.
And there's a famous public health case. So I'm an old public health person, and there's a famous case study. In 1919, the soldiers came home, and there was a peace rally in July 1919 in Perth.
Okay, that's interesting.
And the original wave of the Spanish flu had gone through and subsided. And this very large rally, a very excited rally because the troops had come home and, a very positive thing, but it actually acted as, a super spreading event for the Spanish flu in Western Australia and kicked off it's actually quite a well-known case study. And, before the Black Lives Matter, I read some of this to the press. I had some research done on it, and I read it to the press, and I said the Premier should, my view, if he's really wanting to lock down and this is what we think, he should be very clear. And, but he didn't lock down the Black Lives Matter. There was one rule there and different rule elsewhere. So
even the police commissioner gave the Black Lives Matter its blessing.
A wink and a nudge that you should go forward. Now, they're people, the Black Lives Matter people have got legitimate political points. I don't mind them making their points, but if you're going to say that large gatherings that don't work in a pandemic, and I actually think there's an argument on that, and you're going to draw on public health theory, we've got an Australian case study that says it's a bad idea. Well, why didn't you act on that?
Yeah. Well, I remember when it was happening
100 years ago.
Sorry, Dan.
Michael. You go.
My partner was wanting to go to that, but I was saying, look, we don't know about this pandemic. We don't know how it spread. It could be catching. There's other ways to protest. I actually was about trying to talk her out of going simply because I thought it was dangerous. I mean, we were still trying to come to grips with how virulent this thing was, how dangerous it was. No one knew anything really. It seemed a crazy idea at the time. But the new protests after 2 years of where people have sat back and had more of an evaluation, and they're seeing people losing freedoms. I mean, that's what a lot of people, because Damien and I have been at several of them. A lot of them are young people, old people, people of different races, who are really concerned that our country is heading towards a totalitarianistic sort of state. And want to try stop that, want to try stop segregation and things like that. So it's an interesting situation.
Look, this is a very oppressive government. There's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt that they have curtailed liberties on a scale that we haven't seen in this state well in living memory, I think is probably the best description of it. The use of the public health powers, many justified, but many not clearly explained and justified to the community. As I've said, there is, and I've said this widely for a lengthy period of time, the truth is that decisions are made. There's a public health order that's signed, and there's a brief behind that order. And it's my view that those briefs should all be public, because under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act, they're required by law to consider proportionality. They're meant to be transparent, they're meant to be accountable, and the decisions are meant to be based on science. They're meant to be challengeable. That is the way the Act is structured. And this government has, removed that ability for academics, for industries. As I said on Sky News last night, I was yesterday at a swim school, an indoor swim school. Now, they've all been closed down. They're not in New South Wales. Now, How is it that the science is so different? It just doesn't make sense. Now,
no, it doesn't.
That whole sector should have the right to see that information and challenge it. It might be that there's good information behind it. It might not be, or it might be that the sector can find a less impactful way to achieve the same results. But that should be available to people. It should be available to people, and it's not. And
I guess that was the frustration that spilled out onto the street that you're talking about, and that you couldn't help but notice the politicization of the virus and the inconsistencies and the rules that were being applied. And to be honest, you couldn't help but notice that was occurring throughout the Western world. It wasn't just Daniel Andrews; it was happening in other jurisdictions
you're
as well.
Correct. But just in Australia, we've had the most. And look, as I said also several times in the last couple of days, we got the bad trifecta here. We actually got the worst outcomes on everything. We had the longest period of lockdown. We've had the highest death rate, and we've had the most economic damage.
What do you mean we've had the highest death rate?
Well, the most Victorians of any state, more Victorians have died since the beginning of the pandemic than in any other state. That's just a fact. That is actually if the state government's job is anything, it's actually to keep people safe and protect the economy. You would have thought they're both, and on both of those counts, we've got the worst result. The unemployment figures that come out today show in the month of September we lost 108,000 jobs in Victoria. Far and away the biggest job losses of any state. Nothing is even close to it around the rest of the country.
And it felt really really unfairly on small to medium enterprises, and that's something that is in the Liberal remit to look after those people. And it felt like there was times where Bunnings could be open, McDonald's could be open, big organisations could open up with impunity, Woolworths, Coles, but a small business owner, small business operator couldn't open up to sell coffees. I mean,
so at midnight, some things will open up, somewhat. So we're kind of in a, we're getting
2 years later,
freedoms, isn't it? What they call is additional freedoms, I think is what they call them.
But there's still a lot of restrictions on them, a lot of restrictions on small business.
Those poor retailers.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that? So-called discretionary retailers. You can't go in there. You can go into a pub, you'll be able to go into a pub at 5 minutes past 12 and have 20 people in the pub. Now, how do they arrive at that number? Who would know?
And how does the business to survive at that moment? Something interesting, though, we've been interviewing
the store over the road, the discretionary retailer is not allowed to open. They can't have one person.
But this is it. This is
just wait, Damien. Just for a
business
sec.
with any confidence move forward with that.
How does that?
Yeah,
what is the logic? Sorry, I mean, I'm just.
No, that's okay. We've been interviewing people from around the world to see how people around the world are handling it. Yesterday, a few days ago, we had a guy from Portugal. Now, Portugal have reached their
high
marks
vaccination rate.
High vaccination, but now there and in Spain, everything's open. They're no vaccination passports except for the big events. But he said he goes to work as an IT. No one asks him anything. The vaccinated work with the unvaccinated. No one cares. They're all just getting on with their lives. And we specifically ask about fear and division. And he says it's not happening there. So if they're around the world, countries who maybe don't even have our financial resources are doing well, why aren't we studying them to see, well, why aren't we using that model? Why are we, because all I'm getting now since I've set up this show is every day people calling me going, I've lost my job. I've had to walk away. I don't know what I'm going to do. Single mothers in cars, real estate agents go, I'm not comfortable taking this vaccination yet, but I'm in the car talking to you because I don't want my kids to know I'm unemployed. I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's carnage. It's absolute economic
carnage, and it is going to be really tough building back. We're going to have to, recover. We're going to have to reopen and recover and rebuild, and this is going to take a lot.
But also, David, it's this singleness of focus too, which is so frustrating. That we're just going all the way on these vaccines, which the efficacy of which has been really questioned in other jurisdictions. Like you look at Israel, there's a lot of double vax people there that are no longer considered vaccinated. It's a gene therapy, so it's got a singleness of focus, so it keeps producing a particular spike protein. That
I'm not going to
don't get us kicked off.
I am a former health minister, and I actually am generally respectful of the medical establishment, and I am double vaccinated and proudly so. And I'm not going to. I'm personally not going to criticise.
But David, it's not a matter of criticism. It's a matter of the truth of these jurisdictions that are having those problems and having those issues. So to blindly
I don't think the vaccines are an absolute solution. There's no question about that. But they just happen to be the best that we've got available, and they actually do seem to help the position, and that's all of the evidence.
So why do they already have to, why do those people already have to have a booster? And Daniel Andrews is already talking about a booster for a population that's not even fully vaccinated.
I think that's right. I think that there is a declining declining effectiveness over time with the vaccines, and there will have to be boosters. I think that.
So in the long time, it may have proved to be sensible to just hold on with a bit of caution and say, "Hang on, just to slow down here." Everyone is operating in a hysterical manner, just to wait and see what the efficacy of these untested vaccines are.
Again, we're in a position where we have to work with the best science and best evidence that we can.
That's what I'm suggesting. That's exactly what I'm suggesting.
I'm again work with the medical views that are put to me, and certainly that's what I've understood, that we actually need to have the vaccines and we need to go forward. So
there's also been many studies done on the efficiency.
No, I'm not.
Damien, can we go another way? Because if we talk about the vaccine, we're going to be our page will be kicked down. I want to talk about.
I'm obviously putting.
But that's the loadedness, isn't it? Like this, one protest is allowed to go, one protest is allowed to say whatever it wants about how great the vaccine is. Anyone else questions the other way, we're already playing on such an unlevel playing field.
That's right. Well, that's right. Censorship is rife. But I want to talk about.
So what has the Liberals ever done to stand up for liberal values?
My turn, Damien. My turn. I want to talk about myths and how societies are built on myths. And what I mean by that is good myths. One of the myths they're built on is that the police are there to serve and protect. If you're in trouble, these people have diligently taken on a job which doesn't pay a lot of money, can sometimes be a bit corrupt, but that's okay. We look the other way because we're in times of trouble. These are our heroes. And we teach our kids, these are our heroes. Now, when we go to something like the Shrine and we see our protectors firing on us, this disrupts and is very corrosive to our society. And our society at the moment, from when I've started this show, is full of fear and division. And I think a lot of that is driven from the fact that our myths are sort of crumbling around us and we don't know what to do. Our government is we found out recently in a court case that most of us took it for granted. We knew we didn't have a Bill of Rights, but we had rights of freedom enshrined, and now this hazard case is sort of going, well, no, they're implied and so I think this is really disturbing our society and rebuilding from there. So how do you see how we go back healing this great division? If you've gone in just in this question, how we go healing this division, because we've got a young man here who was going to come on. His parents or grandparents have a new grandchild. They won't see it because the kids aren't vaccinated. They're terrified. They won't see the grandkid. They're that frightened. How do we move forward in healing?
So, I might start with the Anzac aspect that you were referring to first. And, I think we actually ought to treasure our history. We ought to be very prepared to recognise the sacrifices and contributions that have been made. And
absolutely,
if you go to France, as I have, and Belgium, and see those World War I battlefields, you can't be anything but impressed about the contribution that Australians made. If you go to Villers-Bretonneux, you'll see the contribution that Australians have made, and I think we, go at huge risk when we undermine the contribution that people have made in the past. And so I would be always being very clear about the need to protect our values, to protect our history. Now, there are, we do have freedoms. We do have, a history of having freedoms. I think that there are legitimate points that people are making about freedoms now, and I think that if you look at the Charter is a very weak instrument. There's no question about that. The Charter is very weak on property rights, for example. I worry when state governments take people's land and resources without actual proper compensation. So, I actually, as a shadow who's had responsibility for a long period in this recent time for big transport infrastructure projects on the opposition side, I've been very worried about the way the government has treated local communities. This government has treated local communities, and the unfair process of acquiring people's land and so forth. I go back and talk about what happened in the last period of government with taxi licenses.
That's correct.
Removal of people's rights. I recently had a discussion with a chap who had 18 taxi licenses worth, between $400,000 and $500,000 each, and they were compensated with, $100,000 for the first, $50,000 for the next 3 or 4, and then nothing after that. So, I think we've got to be very careful to protect long-standing rights that people have had in our nation,
let's go back to freedom. If I signed a contract with you and I hadn't signed it, but we talked about it, we discussed it, and I'd neglected to sign the contract, and for 2 years we've been working as though I had.
There's implied contractual arrangements in the common law, as you will.
That's right. That's right.
The audience will well know.
Yeah. So when it comes to these freedoms, even though we don't have this Bill of Rights, we have had these freedoms implied upon us: freedom of association, freedom of travel. We've got the Constitution, which says there's no conscription, absolutely not allowed. And now, basically, people are being driven out of their thing. Because I'm not anti-vax. This side is pro-choice, but we are anti-segregation. We really believe that an apartheid country, which is what it is, whether you like it or not, that we're heading into is erroneous for the human soul. It's just really going to be caustic. And if you go through history anywhere, and I know you've got a philosopher's degree in philosophy, if you go anywhere, hate, breeding hate, encouraging division does not generally lead to inclusive, creative, strong societies that I've seen, unless you know of a society that I've unaware of.
You're better as a community respecting rights and treating people fairly. I think you're always going to get a better outcome in what you're trying to achieve, and that's my honest view. I'm not suggesting that that is my view. So,
well,
go on.
I was going to change tack a little bit, so if you want to keep going, because I was going to say it was put to me that as a strategy that the Liberal Party might even like to keep Daniel Andrews as the leader, of the Labor Party, because it's probably their best chance of coming back from being what's left as a rump in the parliament to getting some significant numbers back, and maybe even having a chance of a very unlikely victory at the next election. Is that true to say?
Look, I don't think we get to choose who runs the Labor Party, and I think you can overthink these things. I think our job is to hold the government to account on one hand and propose some alternative policies and solutions on the other.
Is it because was it Neil Angus who, the member for Forest Hill?
Yes.
And I thought he made a really impassioned speech in the parliament.
I didn't hear his speech. I'm in the other chamber, but
you'd be aware of it.
I'm aware that he spoke. Yes. Yeah.
How about the exclusion of the politicians, Catherine Cumming and sorry,
I voted. We voted for an amendment that was put forward by Catherine Cumming. It proposed rapid testing, and it proposed that those who'd been rapid tested would be able to vote. That was defeated, so we supported an amendment put forward by Catherine Cumming. That was a reasonable way forward, and people can read what I said in the chamber on those matters. I pointed to the New South Wales arrangements and the New South Wales motion that had been passed a few days before that did mandate vaccinations but allowed voting. So people can go and read that New South Wales motion on the, in the New South Wales Parliament. And indeed, I read it into the Hansard down here. So I think there were different ways forward. We were obviously, it was not our motion. We didn't bring that motion forward. The truth of the matter is that, we faced that motion. And on one hand, where MPs were treated differently from others would have been wrong too. So, the idea that MPs would have a different rule than nurses or aged care workers or so forth, you can see the difficulty with that.
Okay, seeing the difficulty is one way, but let's look at the moment. The world is very difficult. And our state is very difficult. And as you said yourself, other states are doing things that we're not doing. And, you've been talking about how our government is currently quite draconian. You're in a special place from us in Parliament. A lot of us have been outside looking, basically thinking what's going on. Our churches are all closed. All we hear is this fear porn every day, and people are getting worn out and trying to look for a path forward, hope. How do you, as a politician, keep yourself together, keep hope in your soul when you're seeing soldiers shooting protesters, even if it's rubber bullets? I got shot with a rubber bullet, shooting protesters, and not just at the Shrine that done. We had the grandmother that was knocked over and sprayed in the face. I haven't heard any politicians come out and say, the only thing I heard was a police commissioner say that, I don't know, it's not, you're not in power, so it's not your responsibility. But the police commissioner basically blamed the protesters that she was there. There was no sort of hint that maybe the police were out of order. And now people are losing their jobs left, right, and centre. I mean, we interviewed the other day a homeless support worker who works from home, a single mum. She works from home, helping the homeless stuck in the hotels. And the Salvation Army has had to let her go because she doesn't want to get vaccinated. But you think even that would go against the entire Christian teachings of Jesus. I mean, we're living in this really strange time where our moral compass seems to be askew and fear seems to be in the driving seat. How do you, as a politician, go in, take all that on? Sorry, there should be a question in there.
I think the first thing you do is you don't get ahead of yourself and you don't believe you can do more than what your position is. So,
okay, cool.
You are immortal in a narrow band of what you can do. But Damien has the Legislative Council in the picture behind him, and we fought to keep that open and to keep scrutiny on the government. The fight last year was essentially, a fight by the upper house, because the lower house, the government has absolute majority. It just closed it down, slammed it shut. And it was only the upper house that kept fighting and kept saying, no, you've got a government in a health crisis, and it's got enormous power, unprecedented power, extreme powers. Arguably, some say they're necessary. Then that's a legitimate point. But what they need, on the other hand, is the scrutiny, the accountability. And that's why we fought to keep the chamber sitting. So the first task I saw was to keep the chamber sitting, to keep the scrutiny over the government, to ask the questions. Now, again, we don't control the chamber. In fact, our chamber, nobody controls it. Nobody has a clear majority, but the government has a de facto majority because they get the three amigos, the three Labor voting
cross
independents.
branches.
Yes, they get the three Labor voting independents. But we were able to keep the chamber going, and people will remember that question time where Jenny Makakos refused to answer questions. The Parliament was sitting. She didn't want to answer any questions. She said, "Oh, I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you." Well, the truth is that we have to keep the fight going. We sought to amend all the state of emergency bills that came through. It's our view that if the state of emergency is declared, that Parliament should be sitting, that there should be oversight, that there should be scrutiny, that states of emergency shouldn't be allowed to be extended out into the far distance. They should require a formal vote of the Parliament, both houses, so that, there can be emergencies and there can be circumstances.
Yep, absolutely. We haven't been in this situation before. That's fair enough.
It's unprecedented. We have been as a Westminster system, we have been in situations. The House of Commons kept sitting during the war with the bombers going over the top. The truth of the matter is the Parliament should never have been closed down. The orders of the Chief Health Officer that he and some of the others tried to bully the Parliament into not sitting were outrageous and a direct attack on democracy. The truth is that the Parliament needs to sit. Those questions need to be asked. The ministers need to be held to account. The health minister needs to be asked questions. The attorney general needs to be asked questions.
I felt like that's what the member for Forest Hill was doing in the lower house. He had fire in his belly, and you draw on the idea of Winston Churchill. We had fire in his belly, and as a result of that, he really united the troops around him. And I think that's what the member in the lower house was doing when he made that speech, and it really resonated with people that I know. One of the few times in the last 2 years where a Liberal has made a speech, we went, wow. Okay, fantastic. And then
I think Matthew Guy made a very strong speech a few months back when one of the state of emergency bills was going through, and people will have seen that. They will have seen some of the speeches that we've made in the upper house, and where we've fought to constrain these powers to actually enforce the release of health information, unsuccessfully in some cases. We've often moved amendments and they've been defeated by the amigos, been defeated by those who would endlessly extend the state of emergency, and we've not agreed with that. We've said, short periods of time with proper scrutiny, with the release of proper information as an order. I've moved the motions in the chamber to get the health information released through the orders of the upper house. Now, the government has ignored these orders. This is again an undemocratic attitude.
Do you think that sorry to interrupt you, David, but do you think that the protests are a form of scrutiny on the government? If the government can't be scrutinised in the House, that finally people after because most of us literally when it first happened, we were very compliant. It's only happened later that we were started.
I'm a legislator, and I think as a community leader, it's my responsibility to obey the law and encourage people to obey the law. Now, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to fight to change certain things. It doesn't mean that I don't want to fight to see things altered. It doesn't mean that I don't want to fight to hold governments accountable. So, you know, I've always taken the responsible attitude that I obey the law. That is my view. Not everyone will agree with me, but that is my view.
Mm-hmm. But
they're made by decree by an elected representative called the Joe.
Lawfully, but my point is that they ought to, you know, under the Act, these things ought to be public. Under the orders of the upper house, there are actually orders there saying that all of these health documents should be released. Now, you know, now you've got a government that is in defiance. It is in defiance of those orders.
It's not only in defiance of the orders, it's not only shutting you down, but I just want to show you this picture. I took this picture at the protest where the police first fired on protesters since I believe the Eureka Stockade. I just want to show you this. Why in Melbourne? I understand if there was a terrorist. If there was a terrorist cell that they needed to attack or something like that, I understand you'd need to be police like that. If you've got people just walking around and these were just ordinary folks, why do you need these armored police looking like this? Why do we need Bearcats to police us, enforce us in Melbourne? Why do we need that? I haven't seen the protests. We haven't. You have to admit, we didn't break windows. We didn't overturn cars. We didn't loot. I mean, it's just people calling for freedom. And I know that the press made it look like there was people attacking, but when that man was aiming that gun at protesters, because I was there at the front line, young men were going, "What are you doing? You're aiming at us?" And you can see this in the Rukshan footage. They were outraged that they were having weapons aimed at them. Why have we come to this level where we need to be policed this heavily to a point that it's an enforcement?
Well, look, I'm not going to answer for Daniel Andrews and his approach.
Yep, fair enough, David.
I'm just not. I should say that in my experience, and I have not been at the demonstration, so I'm not going to I'm not going to tell people how to suck eggs, as it were, but I have found in my experience that the police that I have dealt with over the years have been decent and reasonable people, and I have always had a high regard. And you know, I'm not going to be in the position of weakening their position. Now,
David, it's all right to say to take a moral high ground in some respects and say, you know, you obey the law and etc. Or you've been on the public purse the whole time. Has been not a problem. As a matter of fact, I think there's been 2 pay increases in that time. So of the police, and every time the police come out, they've been on great wages. It's fantastic. Another protest, beauty. They're probably getting overtime eventually. But a lot of those people standing on the ramparts saying they just wanted a fair go and they want to be heard and they want to know why what they do isn't essential, why the employment they've got isn't essential to their family's well-being. So it's really rich to sort of say, oh well, I actually think that the point that you make about public sector people being in a more comfortable position than those in many private sector organisations is a very fair one. You know, and there have been many people that I've seen in my electorate who have been in very difficult and you know, distressing positions financially because of what has happened. And I have raised those cases in Parliament. So, and people can go back over the record in Parliament and they will see with a lot of small businesses, I have consistently raised these issues. People have come to me and they have explained their problems, and I have tried to raise those issues on their behalf. That's my fundamental job, is to actually be raising those issues. So the small cafe round the corner from me here in South Yarra, you know, could not get the sort of grants that were meant to be available, limited as they are, but they could not get those grants out of the state. But it all becomes about government largesse. Everyone's going to get a grant.
Well,
you've got to put in, it's going to get a grant. And there's a whole lot of people that are going to miss out, because as soon as government starts playing favourites, there's a whole swathe of people that are going to miss out automatically.
I'm not disagreeing with the essential point that what is needed is for the government to sensibly lift the lockdown safely and to get people back to work. That's actually what actually has to happen. But within that, when a cafe owner comes to me and says, I'm meant to be entitled to this grant that is as modest as it is and will actually help me survive, I'm going to go into bat for him. I don't think that's unreasonable.
I did have a woman on the other day, a store owner, very successful. She had enough money to survive, but she said the grant that she was meant to do, she never got. But
there's a lot of these cases. They just had maladministered. The ombudsman went after the small business minister on this last year, and a lot of these problems have continued. These are people who are desperate, and they can't even give them a $2,000 or a $10,000 grant when they've got all their business costs that are ongoing. So look, people may say that this is not enough, and I probably agree with that. But having said that, I mean, we go into bat for people where there is actually potentially a grant that they can get to help them keep that business afloat, because
is it a problem?
If it goes under, it's not going to come back. That's
politics is now a career. Politics is a career probably for both sides of the House, particularly for the Labor side of the House, but even increasingly so for the Liberal side of the House as well. Is that a problem with the political process that confronts us? That was something that was never intended at Federation.
I was in practice for 12 years before I came into Parliament, so I actually had a different career and a different life. But let me just say, I do think diversity is often talked about, and diversity is important, but diversity includes diversity of background in the economy as well. And there's needs to be more people with a business background. There need to be more people with a background that actually has the real world experience of standing up and making a living for yourself. And I'm
well, that's exactly right. So where you're talking about grants, I mean, I used to be a playwright in the theatre world, basically a lot of it just survived on grants. And they tried to write plays for grants. They couldn't actually survive on themselves. And our business model for our theatre company, we didn't survive on grants. We actually survived on customers, and to a point that for about a year before the pandemic, I was actually surviving as a playwright just from people wanting to come see my plays. So it was possible. And I used to be an advocate saying that if you give a person a fish, they don't learn how to fish.
I agree with your point.
And that's the Liberals. The Liberals, to me, are the champion of small business.
I agree.
And now we're opening up. And basically, we're telling these businesses that have been crushed, literally crushed, huge debts, that they can only have a certain percentage of people in, even when they open up fully. They say, okay, the unvaccinated aren't allowed in. You need to have an extra staff on to police. You need to police your clients constantly. It just seems economic. Like I had a guy contact me, and they were asking me to put their story up. He runs an ice cream store, very, very successful ice cream store pre-COVID. And he goes, what am I supposed to do when the kids can't come in? And how does that, or if they come in with their parents and I've got to call the police on them while I'm trying to run a nurturing business, I just feel, could there be another way to move forward rather than vaccine passports?
Well, I think the New South Wales experience has been a better one. As I said before, we got the bad trifecta, the longest lockdown, the worst death rate, and the most economic damage. New South Wales, first under Gladys Berejiklian and now under the new Premier Perrottet, have opened much more quickly than here. They have been much less excessive in their lockdowns, and I think that points to the way that you can actually do a lot better.
We went up to Sydney during one of the breaks, and because the army was touring one of my plays, and we went up to put it in the barracks there, and then we put the play on in a theatre in Sydney. I was amazed how relaxed Sydney was. They were still getting you to log on. Everyone was still going, can you just sign in with your Q code? And they were on tables, but there was a relax. There was no fear anywhere. You know, it was actually like breathing again. You know, and there was we still had an Australian spirit going through it. Here, I feel that our leader is just peddling fear so much that it's consumed people, and they're struggling to cope with it. And as we get out of this, from a liberal point of view, I feel entrepreneurs are literally the people that can save our state. The ones where you've got to fire them up, get them out
crazy
there.
to stay in the
Well,
state.
I couldn't agree more.
Here. You think they'd be
I
leaving
couldn't
in
agree
droves.
more. And we need to open up carefully, safely. But New South Wales has shown some very clear steps that we can take. And let's go. Let's go.
Jim's mowing. People that
forward.
worked for the Jim's mowing franchise weren't allowed to mow lawns while they were watching, government contractors still mowing lawns.
It was bizarre and uneven and unfair. And where is the health advice? Where is the health advice?
Stalin worked out that if he was good to the bureaucrats, he could stay in power. He could stay in power by simply rewarding a bureaucracy, and in the meantime, destroy a culture and a society. And it feels like that's what
I think it's done a lot of damage. And indeed, I raised some of the issues about Jim's mowing in the Parliament and elsewhere. And we've got the small business minister, and we continue to ask the questions with her and to actually push really quite firmly on a lot of issues. The idea that lone workers with a lawnmower or a whippersnipper out in the garden couldn't safely work.
Collecting the money digitally more often than not, having the money transferred.
Well, indeed, the whole thing was bizarre, and
while the brothels were all open.
Yeah. And you wonder why people are at the shrine.
I don't know
how
the close,
David?
Do
you really wonder why people...
the social distancing works there, but...
do you wonder why people are at the shrine, David? Do you really wonder why those people ended up feeling so frustrated and no other place to express?
Let me just say that I think that, again, where is the health advice on some of this stuff? I mean, they've kept this secret. They've kept it hidden. Where's the Jim's mowing advice that says that a lawnmower can't do stuff safely?
I think
really,
David,
because most shop owners, most entrepreneurs do not want to endanger their customers. Doesn't make any sense.
Of course.
So if you leave it with them, they're not going to take risks because they want the customer to come back. So the last thing they want to do is kill them. So there will be the responsibility there to keep people safe. And the business owners I've had on talking on the show have said they religiously did that. They worked very, very hard to have a safe environment, but they still want to make money because that's the driving force. The whole country ran on the back of small business.
And costs, and
absolutely.
And I think many in the public sector don't understand that in business people have got overheads and costs. That it's
someone's got to pay the taxes to employ them. It's pretty.
But can I say, even though you're not in power. We had a priest on last night because we were contacting the churches saying, can we get a priest on? And there's silence everywhere. Then we found out there was a letter written by 77 priests for the public that the archbishops didn't want out because they thought it would create division. But this priest came on the other night. It was an extraordinary, we had a few tech issues, but it was an extraordinary show because the people are hungry to hear from spiritual leaders and even political leaders who you might not be in power, but you have been voted in to represent us. And there are speeches you can make which can instill us with hope of how do we like.
I invite people to look on my website, but also to look in the Parliament and actually see exactly the sort of things that we've said. And we have worked very hard to try and hold the government to account, to point out the failings with that has occurred here, and to actually go into bat on behalf of the many small businesses and different sectors of the economy. That's our task. That's
another task that you have though is like to lead. And I'm not putting down if there's one politician we had on. Did a speech in Parliament. We shared it on our show, on our page. Had 400,000 views the last time I checked. People are sharing anything that has hope. They're just sharing anything. This is an amazing medium to do speeches, even if you can't offer hope, but just leading by example of what we're doing It's I think
moral
there's
conviction,
yeah,
wasn't it? Well, that's what
because
we're offered.
as we move forward, because a lot of people feel that we're losing something great about Australians and we're never going back there. But I feel we can go back there
I feel we can.
if we don't fall into hating each other, dividing each other. If we can somehow get through this, respect people's rights to choose, even if we don't agree with it and we can't understand it. I mean, a lot of people can't understand why someone would jump out of an airplane on a parachute, but we allow it. You know what I mean? Some people don't understand why people ride motorbikes without helmets, ride motorbikes, but we allow it. Or that guy that sailed around the world and we had to go rescue him because he was in his upturned boat.
Yeah.
We didn't stop people sailing around the world. We said, no, mate, we'll go do it. We even paid the price. We even took up the bill. There's something beautiful about Australians allowing people to live their lives, and the government are giving them the framework in which to do that. Where now it's basically like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. I feel we need to get back to something good, and even if you're not in power, offering our children hope and our grandchildren hope is something sorely needed.
And I think the religious views have got a lot to commend them too. And I'm pleased that you've had people like religious leaders on the show. I think that is important, and I think the closure effectively of many religious communities in this period has been very damaging. There's no question about that. I should say that we are trying to offer hope as we go forward, and I think Matthew Guy has been working very hard to get a strong message out there. We're having a lot to do with many of the business community as we try to get things back, try to open things up in a safe way, try to pressure the government into reopening. And as I say, every day we're trying to make that point. As I said yesterday, we were out at a swim school.
You said. Are you going? Sorry to interrupt. Just before we go, are you going to pressure the government to not introduce permanent pandemic laws? Because this is what's really frightening a lot of people.
Well,
because we've been told that we can't stop it.
Let me just say what I know about them and what I don't know about them. I haven't seen them. Some of the crossbench, the Labor voting independents have seen versions of them, and if the reports are to be understood, there will be some legislation probably come next week to the Parliament. Now, we have taken the view, and this would apply to this as well, we would want to see any period where there is a curtailment of people's rights and liberties, we would want to see the Parliament actually have that oversight. We would want to see tougher information, and we would want to see short extensions that are time limited and sharply constrained, so that a set of pandemic powers are oversighted, controlled, and finite. We can't have an open season on this, and
No.
that's our view. And and if people go online, and they will see when the last state of emergency extensions were happening, I moved amendments, a series of amendments to try and fix exactly these problems, to say month to month, not more, to say
David,
proper release of information, proper oversight. We said there should be a parliamentary committee oversighting all this. The government voted that down. In fact, that actually was blocked. It got to, I think it was 1818, but someone will correct me on the exact numbers. It fell on equal numbers in the upper house. We went very close to getting numbers to get up a proper oversight committee to actually look at all of the pandemic stuff, to look at all.
And they would have the power to stop it?
It would have the power. It would have the power to subpoena information. It would have the power to bring people before it. It would have the power to actually dig and dive and to hold people to account.
I think if people could actually hear this information, I don't think there would have been protests. A lot of the protests were just against the great silence.
I do think it's true that the absence of proper transparency does make it much more difficult for people. And I think people are entitled to know. They're entitled to see. They're entitled to question. That's where it is. But somebody's just put up that I have no power. Well, it's true that I'm not in power. I can only fight. And
don't read the comments.
No. Well,
I think, David, I just want to say, because I think that points to a greater issue. Now, you have a degree in applied philosophy, yeah?
Yes.
So the reality is, isn't it, that the centre right or the liberal side of politics, and again, this is across the Western world, has lost the culture war. That's the problem here. So no one has the heart or the stomach to reform the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy just grows and grows and grows and grows. And actually now what we're seeing is the bureaucracy dominating the culture. And look what happens when the bureaucracy does dominate the culture. It works perfectly for Daniel Andrews, because
Do you agree
the Liberal
David?
Party haven't fought the culture war.
Well,
Do you agree with that, David?
I think there has been a culture war in the West for many decades now. I think that is true. And I think that the left has had the prime running through a lot of that culture war period. And I think that has done tremendous damage to many of our established institutions, whether they be religious institutions or whether they be parliamentary institutions,
Artistic.
whether they be in education.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And I could go,
the programming on the television, the programming that everyone sees and constantly watches is anti your position.
Anti-established institutions, anti the values of established institutions, anti the family,
anti-debate,
anti
the right to discuss.
I think that there is a tremendous problem for us across the West. It is, as you correctly point out, it's not simply Australia. I think it's much broader than
than
that.
The Western world.
You can see the situation in the United States. You can see it in Britain. And that is So we'll
inevitably move then to a globalist future where unelected bureaucrats rule over us and dictate to us.
Well, I think there's some things against that working against that. I think that often these things don't turn out as the establishment, and I call it establishment in the modern left wing sense, the left wing establishment want. And there are some notable cases, Brexit probably being the most significant of those in recent years. And the globalist establishment didn't.
And look how long it took to get that through. Look how long, and look how torturous. Look how torturous the process was to actually get that instituted, even though it was voted on a referendum by the people, by the will of the people.
That's right.
Can you imagine gay marriage having such a struggle after winning a landslide vote?
Well, they're very powerful institutions. There's no question of that. And you had court rulings. You had all sorts of things that didn't help that get through easily.
Well, there was no political will by the established elite.
There was a few who kept fighting for it, though. And to be fair, and I don't think anyone would say that Boris didn't run the hard race with that.
Can I get in though, Dan, with what Damien said then about because I was fighting for the rights of gay marriage. I was in that battle, but what I find
gay marriage, and I supported that at the time. And I supported it because I'm a person who believes in the rights of people to do these things.
To be happy, but
that doesn't mean you diminish the choices of others.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But what I want to bring up was the plebiscite. Now, with this thing of coming in with vaccine passports, that's going to divide our country. It's already doing it right now. It's such a huge change for our culture. Why couldn't the people? Because politicians always say if you give it to the people generally get it right in referendums and stuff like that. That's what they say, whether they believe it or not. That's what they say. Why couldn't the people have been given a plebiscite? We've all been sitting at home. We went anywhere. There's nothing we could do. We could have easily got the time to do it. It could be done online.
Allowed to vote, were we?
Well, we could have done it online or something like that. But why can't we have? Why couldn't we have the people decide? Because it's going to change our culture. It's going to huge change, and it's already having detrimental effects. Why couldn't we have had? Why couldn't that vote been put to the people? I know you're not in the power to do it, but do you think that's a crazy idea, or do you think that's
look,
something that the government should decide?
I'm personally not against more direct democracy, and I think that there's a reasonable case for more involvement of local community, and I generally would have the view that the lowest level of government, the one closest to the people, should have as much authority as it can. That's in a European context, it's a subsidiarity type attitude. I'm not against having more votes for people and more say for people. There is a side of people where they don't want more votes. I think there are some who have that view too. Some in the western side of the United States, in particular, have a recall system and a plebiscite system that actually provides a lot more authority to the community rather than the 4-year voting cycle. I think in good democracies, participatory democracy doesn't end. Somebody's using the direct democracy word there. It's a good description. But participatory democracy means that people ought to be able to contribute and have their say between elections. It's not it's 4 years and then it's off, and 4 years, and so in terms of long-term reform, I'm not averse to looking at different ways.
Do you have? I've just got one more question, because someone's just put up here who used to work for the Liberal Party that she says Dan doesn't like democracy, but are you concerned for our democracy? There's a lot of people are. Are you concerned for the way it's going at the moment?
Well, I see Sally Leslie's put up a point there about the IBAC activities. I think within the Labor Party, there's been a terrible sort of misuse of power. The red shirts activities, the theft of public money, and the use for a Labor Party campaign. I can't think of anything that's more extreme than that. So yes, I think there are real issues here, and I think Andrews is, he's been a very bad premier in so many ways for the state. We've lost a lot of our position where the state is sliding, and if you want a marker on that's more strong than anything else that you will see, the last population statistics that have come out, the figures to the end of March this year, so they're quite recent, and what they showed is that all other states in Australia and territories actually had an increase in population. We had a fall in population in Victoria of 42,900 in 1 year. 0.6%.
More now. Everyone, I have so many people telling me they're leaving.
If you go back over the state's history with population movements and that interstate movement between different states and territories, that is a very significant marker of how the state is doing it. It's about people's choices. It's about economic opportunities. It's about jobs. Let's be clear, a big part of it is jobs. And the truth is that the economic opportunities have slid here. We've got massive deficit. The state of the finances came down on Friday last week, so 6 days ago. 72 billion was the net debt of the state, and that's up 64% in 1 year. So that's a huge increase. Now, no one's arguing that there shouldn't have been some spending on COVID, but not all of that debt increase is about bugs and pandemic. A lot of it was about waste and money squandered on major projects that where the thing got away from the government, major projects where they didn't scope it properly, and huge amounts of money have been squandered through mismanagement. So
there's only going to be more of it, David, because your Prime Minister, the Liberal Prime Minister, has just moved to a net zero by 2050 as well, and that'll just mean more and more big government.
Well, I'm looking at very homegrown projects here. I'm looking at very homegrown projects here. You look at the Metro Tunnel, starts at 11 billion, is now at 15 billion. Now, people go, oh, it's only 4 billion. Well, 4 billion is 4 Royal Children's Hospitals. That's what you're actually talking about.
In a time when
World-
we need hospitals, we don't need tunnels.
Well, and even with
How's
good
the
projects,
desal
they've
plant
got-
going down in Wonthaggi?
Well,
Has it
well,
been
I-
turned,
you know, I-
turned on yet? Has anyone turned it on?
Well, so it's good
Or
value
we
for
just
money.
tick it
That
up a little
desal
bit just so
plant.
it keeps working.
Oh my God, the thing, and they give it orders. There's been so much, I was going to use a word there, significant rain this year, and the idea that that we would have an order in for the desal plant. I mean, honestly.
But you never hold those people to account.
We're keeping you now. Did you say you had a degree in philosophy, or what did you call it? What was the degree you had?
I have 3 formal qualifications. I have a Bachelor of Science, I have a Bachelor of Applied Science, I have a Bachelor of Arts, and I have a graduate diploma in Applied Philosophy.
Applied philosophy.
I regard the experience in the real world as
no. That's in the just coming from a philosophical point of view. As we move forward, people need to thrive in a community. They need hope. They need safety, but they need hope. They need hope more than I think they even need buildings and houses and all this other stuff. They need hope to give to their children. They need figures that they can believe in. That's why I was talking about myths, which is, I think, what we're struggling now. What can you offer just to finish the day and just to give you something to say to the people as we finish off?
So
there's so much fear in society. There's so many people turning against each other. Dobbing people in has become rife. We seem to be losing some integral beauty about who we were. What can you say to people from a philosophical point of time, under a time of duress? How do you hold on to what's good within us?
So I look at our position of our state as a Western state, as a Western civilization, with a long history going back into Europe, particularly into Britain, going back many centuries. And if you look at the challenges that have confronted our civilization over those many years, there have been wars, there has been pestilence even, and there have been significant challenges, political challenges and challenges to our way of life. And we've always come through this, whether it's, as I say, the going to the battlefields of France and Flanders in, a small number of years ago with my father and son, and seeing that point of our history. John Monash, a great general, he to me typifies, the strength of Victorians. He was a Victorian. He was an engineer. He was a soldier.
It's another era, isn't it, David? I think we're looking more to the east now for our.
No, but I'm making the point that there's been these challenges for our civilization, and we've always come through them. And I feel that we will come through them. I feel that things will put right. I think our economy will grow again. I think that the natural balancing things in our democracy will assert themselves too. And, I think there will be a change of government, and there will be a focus on rebuilding our economy, rebuilding our future, recovering our jobs, and actually providing our kids with hopes. I look
what
at
difference will a change of government make, David, when you're, like I said
before,
one of
the
your
things
federal
is
leader, who's the Prime Minister, has pivoted to net zero by 2050.
We will, if we win next year, we will be focused on giving people the ability to go forward as themselves and their family, actually their business, actually being able to make a way and a future for themselves without the government impeding them, with the government encouraging them, and actually making it so that actually we can rebuild the state. Governments don't rebuild the state. It's actually what people do. It's what businesses do. It's what individuals do in their work life and in their family life that really build the state. So
they create a framework
I agree.
to operate.
You need the entrepreneurs to build the economy, and you need the spiritual leaders and anyone else to heal the economy. And
sometimes governments need to get out of the way and let the economy do
That's a good thing to say to Dan.
Yeah.
Start reforming.
Come in. Why is it that
free up some of that money?
Why is it that tomorrow
you don't want to take
all
on feminism?
Those retailers are locked down
cut into that bureaucracy.
Can't open their businesses. What is that? What is that? And yet we know it can happen in New South Wales. Yeah. So, I'm sorry. Anyway, I think
that's been enough. I'm going to end on something positive, though. This woman approached me. She's a month away from becoming a psychologist. She can't finish it now because of her medical choices. She's a mental health professional. She's just lost her job, and she was sitting at home and she thought, what am I going to do? And she posted this, and I thought, this is the spirit of the future. So I'm going to end with this because she really brought me up.
Archie's not still waiting backstage, is he?
Yeah, he is. We'll talk to him in a sec. Anyway, sorry, David, mate. Thank you for coming on. I'm glad you showed up. I hope we haven't.
Thanks, David.
Look, I wish us all the best in the future as we move forward, David. So thank you for coming on. And I wish you luck in Parliament with our great leader. Yeah. So here goes. Here's this thing. I think this will make you smile as we move towards Freedom Day. So she's become a DJ overnight, taught herself.
It's my last one for tonight. It's the middle of the week after all. It's a good release.
So she's making herself available for unvaccinated parties. That's an entrepreneur. She's had a whole dream. She's had a whole dreams destroyed, and she's already advertising on a new career. Good night, David. Thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
See you.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Let's rock out. Oh fuck! Here it is. Add to stream. Good night, Australia.